All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Navigating Chicago's New COVID-19 Regulations. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. My name is Isaac Reichman. I'm the Director of Public Information at the City of Chicago Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection. We've been holding these webinars at BACP throughout the COVID-19 crisis. This is, I believe, our 38th webinar specifically on COVID-19 regulations. We also host a number of other webinars on a variety of different topics for businesses. You can find all of our webinars at chicago.gov/businesseducation. I'm typing that into the chat right now. That's chicago.gov/businesseducation. So whenever we have any changes in reopening guidelines like we did this week, or really at least twice a week, we host a variety of different webinars. So please do check out that website. That's how you got to today's webinar. Big portion of today's webinar, there is not a lot of content. I want to make sure we have time for questions. I will do my best to answer questions as they come in. Please use the chat function for questions. That's the easiest way for me to see questions as they come in. I just typed into the chat. Please do not use the Q&A, use the chat. It's much easier for me to see questions as they're coming through. I may not be able to answer every question just because I may not know the answer. I may have to check with some colleagues, or perhaps your question is a very specific question that requires a little bit more digging into than can be done over the course of a webinar. If that's the case, you can submit your questions to our general BACP email. That's bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. Again, bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. You'll find that on the bottom of every slide on this webinar. I also just typed it into the chat as well. Additionally, today's webinar is being recorded. You can find it after the webinar. We'll post it on that business education website. We'll also post it on our YouTube page. That's youtube.com/ChicagoBACP. You can find all of our old webinars there as well. Obviously, the reopening guidelines are changing pretty regularly. So if you're looking for the latest, make sure you're following the latest webinar on that. You can also find all of the reopening guidelines for Chicago at our reopening website. That's chicago.gov/reopening. So everything I'm covering in today's webinar can also be found there. Great. So without further ado, I'll jump into today's webinar. As always, I want to start with an update on where we are in our 4 main COVID-19 metrics. As we have seen pretty consistently over the last few weeks and months, even as we have slowly eased regulations, we are still doing great across the board on all our COVID-19 metrics, which is really, really a great sign. Our goal, as you can see here, has been to get to at least the moderate risk level and then to maintain that level for at least 2 weeks, which is which we were able to do, and which is why we are at this point that we are at today. So just as a reminder, our 4 metrics that the city is looking at, and real quick as a disclaimer, I'm here with the Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection. I am not the Department of Public Health. So if folks have kind of very specific health questions, I may know the answer, most likely will not though, and we'll have to check with my colleagues over the Department of Public Health. I'm not the health expert, but I do want to still lead with the health metrics and where we're at as a city. So first, COVID-19 cases diagnosed per day. We're currently and have been averaging now for a little bit in the high 200s number. That's great. Our goal, this was the metric that was the last to get into the moderate risk level. We're still pretty solidly in that moderate risk level. Our goal is to get below 200 cases a day, but it's still very good that we are below 400 and hovering pretty consistently around that high 200s. Our test positivity, this is amazing news. We've been under 3% now for the last couple days. We're currently at 2.9%. This is, it's been over a week now, I think, that Chicago has actually been on the lowest test positivity rate we've ever had in the city of Chicago since COVID came about a year ago. So that's great news. Emergency department visits, this is something that the health department tracks. This is for COVID-19-like illnesses. So it's not only just for COVID-19, it's for people presenting with something that might be COVID-19. We're pretty solidly in that lower risk level. And I believe this is also at the lowest or close to the lowest it's ever been during COVID as well. Finally, ICU beds. This is focusing on our ability to kind of withstand a potential surge. We're currently at the exact bottom you can be of the moderate risk, and hopefully we'll be moving into lower risk tomorrow. So all this is to say, great news across the board. There's a lot of great news when it comes to COVID, here. But as you can see, we're not fully in that lower risk level. We're definitely not in that controlled transmission level. We're moving in the right direction. We have been for a while, and we're ramping up vaccines. We're doing all that, which is great. But the real message to get away from here is we're still in this. So it is still really important to be following these rules. So a quick question come in. Again, I'm not a health expert, but I'll do my best to answer these questions. Test positivity. Does test positivity mean the number of people tested who are positive? Yes, I believe COVID-19 test. Yes, I believe it is the number of people tested who are positive. And you can find all these in actually a way better description than I could give at our COVID dashboard. That's at chi.gov/COVID-. So again, I don't want to say anything incorrect on the health metrics. chi.gov/COVID-. Great. So the reason why, and I want to lead with these metrics, is the reason why we were able to make this announcement that we made this past Tuesday was because we had reached this moderate risk level and we had stayed there or improved for at least 2 weeks. So effective this past Tuesday, here are the 4 main changes that come into effect here in Chicago. Then I'm going to go into all the different industries in detail. First, indoor capacity at most businesses is now increased to the lesser of 50% or 50 people. So this is especially, indoor dining can increase to 50% capacity. However, the limit of 50 people within a room or space for bars, restaurants, and other businesses does remain in effect. Bars, restaurants, and events can now operate for on-site service until 1:00 a.m. There is no earlier liquor curfew. So it is the responsibility of the bar, restaurant, or event to make sure that their patrons are off-site by 1 a.m., but there doesn't need to be an earlier time in which they stop selling alcohol. So it's up to you as a business to decide exactly when last call is. The important thing, if we show up at 1:05 and there's still people on site eating, drinking, even if they're getting ready to leave, that's not okay. They need to be off site at 1 a.m. Additionally, liquor sales from liquor stores, grocery stores, corner marts, places like that with a packaged goods license can now continue until 11 p.m. That is 2 hours later than the 9 p.m. curfew that has been in effect until since April. Finally, health and fitness center classes can now expand from 15 people to 20 people. However, the limit of 50% capacity and 6 feet between guests must still remain in effect. So if you cannot expand, so if you were to expand to 20 people and that would get you over 50% capacity, or would make it so you have more than 50, less than 6 feet between guests, then that would not be allowed. So that's the overview of the changes. I'm now going to go into the different industries in a little bit more detail. First, bars and restaurants. Again, indoor service is capped at 50% capacity or 50 people per room or space. A quick point on this, and I'm happy to answer questions. One question we've been getting is, what about those really, really large establishments that this change doesn't really mean anything because they've already been at 50 people. Larger establishments can divide their space into multiple different spaces using impermeable barriers like plexiglass, for example. So if you have a really large space and you're able to divide it using impermeable barriers, you can get up to 50% capacity or 50 people, whichever is less, within each of those spaces. Obviously, you would need to invest in those impermeable barriers, plexiglass, things like that. but we want to make sure folks know that that at least is an option. If you have a large room that 50 people is a very small amount, you can divide it using impermeable barriers like plexiglass, things like that. We're also happy if you have detailed questions on that, send us an email. We're happy to kind of look at plans, make sure something works or doesn't work. Our general guidelines, these impermeable barriers need to be taller than people. You can't just have a 4-foot high impermeable barrier. That wouldn't be enough. You would need to have some sort of impermeable barrier, recommend something about 7 feet. That's really taller than people when they're walking around. Tables still limited to no more than 6 people with 6 feet between tables. And bar seating is allowed with 6 feet between parties at bars. Patrons again must be off-site by 1 a.m. Indoor and outdoor events are also capped at these same limits. That's 50% capacity or no more than 50 people. Commercial and residential buildings, again, you'll see this pretty regularly. 50% capacity, no more than 50 per space. Events also limited to this 50% capacity, no more than 50 per space. Indoor recreation, same, 50%, no more than 50 per space. Museums and zoos are the only businesses that are still limited to 25% capacity. This is something that has been in effect. This is something that is set by the state. This is something that we do not have any control over. 25% capacity for museums and zoos. Personal services limited to 50% capacity. Services that require the removal of face coverings are allowed with safety precautions. And retail stores, non-essential and essential, at 50% capacity. Performance venues and movie theaters at 50% capacity, 50 per space. Health and fitness centers at 50% indoor capacity. Group classes also limited to 50% capacity with no more than 20 per space for group classes. Now I see a number of questions come in specifically related to events, restaurants, bars, things like that. Some of these questions I'll say in advance, I will need you to send via email, and I'm happy to help get answers, but I will need to check with our health department on some of the specifics on what will be considered an impermeable barrier or not. Real quick though, before I get to these questions, I want to go over bars and restaurants in a little bit more detail. First, bars, restaurants, indoor service is permitted, again, lesser of 50 people or 50% capacity, 6 people per table. Food must be still available at all times. I've said this at all our webinars. I want to make sure to say it again. If you're at a bar, a tavern, a brewery, a place like that, that does not have a food license, you can still be open. We really do not want this to be such a burden that you cannot reopen. So it can be as simple as having menus available from a nearby restaurant. It can be as simple as, really allowing delivery from Grubhub, Uber Eats, DoorDash, places like that. This does not need to be a formal partnership, does not need to be anything that should really be a heavy lift for bars, taverns, breweries, places like that. Fully enclosed tents are allowed. They are considered indoors though, which means you need to follow the indoor regulations, not the outdoor regulations. Bar seating is allowed. You need 6 feet between parties. Outdoor service is permitted under existing regulations. Outdoor service has always been allowed. Obviously, it's starting to get nice out. I hear it's supposed to be into the 60s next week. So we really, while indoor dining is allowed, we want to really encourage folks to be outside as much as possible. All the guidelines say outside is certainly safer than inside. So sidewalk cafes, outdoor patios, expanded outdoor dining. We will be sharing more information about expanded outdoor dining and sidewalk cafes for this next season in just a few weeks. Rooftops, retractable roofs, considered outdoors. Outdoor tents that are at least 50% open are considered outdoors. Igloos and other one-party structures. And then finally, indoor spaces where 50% or more of a wall can be removed via the opening of a window, door, or panel, provided that dining tables are at least within 8 feet of those openings. This is something that's always been the case. If you have windows that can open at least 50% of the wall, garage doors, panels that can be removed, things like that, tables that are within 8 feet of that are considered outdoors and therefore do not count towards your 50% or 50 people capacity. Still no more than 6 people per outdoor table and still 6 feet between tables. Face coverings must be worn in all indoor and outdoor public settings except when seated and actively eating or drinking. So, this is when your server comes up, when you're walking around. If we show up and we see people not wearing face masks while they're walking around, that's a pretty immediate and obvious citation. Tables must be 6 feet apart. Patrons must be seated while eating or drinking. Again, this is really important. If we show up and we see people walking around eating or drinking, that's really a double violation. First, patrons are not seated while eating or drinking. Second, they don't have their face coverings on while they're mingling, walking around. That's not okay. Again, an easy citation for us. Events can occur, but they must follow these indoor dining regulations. So everything we're saying here about indoor dining, about bars and restaurants, also applies to events. So you can have events, but folks must be seated while eating or drinking. Reservations in that 2-hour time limit, they are no longer required, but they are encouraged. We definitely encourage reservations. We definitely encourage a 2-hour time limit. We also know a lot of bars and restaurants are doing that anyway so that they can get people cycling in and out. It is something we encourage so that folks aren't, staying too long, having a bit too much to drink, and letting down their inhibitions. Again, patrons must be off-site by 1 a.m. I'll repeat this, 105, not 105, not 102, not 110. It's up to you as an establishment when exactly last call is, but the important thing is they need to be off-site at 1 a.m. Pickup or delivery of food can continue at all licensed hours. So, the only reason why someone might be on site, a patron can be on site after 1, only if they're there to pick up food. They cannot be there eating, drinking, things like that. Great. I see a lot of questions come in. I will say I'll do my best to answer as many of these as I can right now. Some specific questions, though, again, about what exactly constitutes an impermeable barrier or not, please send us that via email, bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. Great. So, great question. I got one here. Are capacity placards required in order to divide a space? So no, you would not need a separate capacity placard in order to divide a space up. If, a number of different bars and restaurants, if they're smaller, don't have occupancy placards. Generally what we, to give you a quick overview of kind of generally how to calculate capacity, if you don't have a placard or if you're dividing a space. Typically for bars and restaurants in normal pre-COVID times, we would say 1 person per 15 square feet. Therefore, now that we're at 50% capacity, you would say 1 person per 30 square feet. Therefore, if you want to find your capacity of your space, take your square footage and divide it by 30 in order to find out what 50% capacity is. Again, if you want to find 50% capacity, take your square footage and divide it by 30. If you are dividing a space with impermeable barriers, you do not need a separate occupancy placard for each one of those spaces. Right. I got a question here for events. If you have 2 spaces with a max of 50 people per space, can you have an event of 100 people? Again, this is similar to bars and restaurants. You can, provided that they are actually separate spaces and provided they're actually separate spaces and there isn't intermingling regularly between those spaces. So it's not enough, you can't, if you have 2 separate spaces, both of those spaces need to always have no more than 50 people and 50% capacity. You can't have at one time 100 people in either one of those spaces. At this great question here, are restaurants able to open self-serve lines? At this point, they can be open, but they need to have employees serving the food. So self-serve lines cannot be open at this point. I do not know when this would change, but at this point, that is something that is still a requirement. I do see a couple questions about when are we going to be increasing. I know there's a lot of calls for when are we going to have larger events, larger things like that. That is something that I know we in the city are actively working on and hope to be sharing additional guidance soon. There's also something that we're looking to our partners at the state to provide additional guidance as well. You know, events at the state level are also limited to 50 people at this point. So we need, when you know that we cannot be less strict here in the city than the state. Do people have to remain seated at a private event? At this point, yes, people do need to remain seated at private events. You can, you know, while people need to remain seated while eating or drinking, I should say. And while they are, you know, if people are standing, mingling, things like that, they cannot be eating or drinking. They need to have face coverings on during that time. Great. Specific capacity for outdoor events. So at this point, outdoor events are still limited to 50 people or 50% per space. There are no changes to that at this point. Yeah, again, no more than 50 people or 50% per space. That is something, though, I can tell you that the city is actively working on more details, more plans for outdoor events into the future, and we hope to be sharing more information on that soon. Right. Question about outdoor swimming pools. I believe that outdoor swimming pools are limited to 50% capacity as well. Really, at this point, every business, everything kind of across the board, you're looking at 50% capacity. Had a question again about when the number will increase. What I will say to that is again, I'm not the health department. We're the communicators. We're not making these decisions here at BACP. But what I will say is the health department looks at things pretty regularly on a 2-week cadence. That's the incubation period for the virus, 14 days or 2 weeks. So things will not change. Things will only change after 2 weeks. So I will say that, you know, that's kind of actively when the city is looking to potentially make changes, is after 2 weeks or around 2 weeks after changes are made. So these changes came into effect just this past Tuesday, March 2nd. So I would have folks, you know, start paying attention potentially 2 weeks from then, which would be March 16th, for some potential updates at that point. So again, I don't have any speculation. I will say, though, the city is evaluating these kind of on a 2-week level. Great. Question here for personal services. Do they still need to practice 6 feet of social distancing? Yes, you should have 6 feet of social distancing is kind of the magic number across the board. Obviously, the employee giving the haircut, something like that under personal services is can be within 6 feet, but they need to have proper PPE on. But you should have 6 feet between customers and between booths, things like that. Right. Question here: if guests are mingling around highboy tables during cocktail hours at events, does that satisfy the eating or drinking requirements? So, no. Folks need to be seated while eating or drinking. So mingling, standing around highboys does not suffice. People still need to be seated whenever they are eating or drinking. Okay. Had a question here. Can you host a wedding in a ballroom with more than 50 people if you install clear partitions between tables? Or can you set up dividers in the ballroom for each 50 people and host 200 people? So 2 parts there. The answer to the first question is no. You cannot have 200 people even if you have partitions kind of between tables. However, you can divide your ballroom into different spaces, each having no more than 50 people, again, provided that these are truly impermeable barriers. Great. At this point, a couple questions come in around dancing. At this point, this is something actually coming from the state as well, not just from the city. At this point, dance floors is not allowed. Dance floors do need to be closed. Right. Couple questions about the special events permit package. Again, this is something that our partners over the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events that they're actively working on, and hope to have some more information to share soon. A couple questions again about expected dates into the future. I don't have anything at this point to share beyond, again, we're looking at things kind of on a 2-week cadence at this point. Right. Again, so staff do have to serve foods. Buffet lines cannot be open at this point. Great, a couple questions. A couple questions here around swimming pools. Swimming pools are allowed to be open at hotels, at health and fitness centers, at residential buildings. They're limited to 50% capacity. If you're unable to ensure that 50% capacity is being met, then you are required to, you should have them closed if you can't make sure that that 50% capacity is being met. Face coverings are allowed to be removed within swimming pools. Real quick on health and fitness centers, indoor activity for health and fitness centers, again, provided at 50% capacity. Indoor group classes with no more than 20 people. Outdoor fitness classes are limited to 50 participants. The only time face coverings can be removed is during outdoor activity if 6 feet of social distancing is maintained. Again, you need to maintain 6 feet of social distancing. Locker rooms can be open, and swimming pools can be open, as I said, but saunas, steam rooms, hot tubs, places like that cannot maintain cannot have social distancing must be closed. This is also something, got a couple questions for this. This is something that's coming to us from the state. The state is saying saunas, steam rooms, hot tubs, places like that must be closed. And again, the city cannot be less strict from the state. Reservations are not required for health and fitness centers, but they are encouraged. See a couple questions come through. I want to provide some quick other business updates. Just a reminder for license extensions, all business licenses that were set to expire during the COVID-19 pandemic from since March 15th in 2020 have been extended. So if your license was set to expire between March 15th of last year and June 15th of this year, they will be considered active until July 15th, 2021. Sidewalk cafes have also been extended. Typically, they would expire at the end of February. They've been extended until May 1st. We will be preparing the Sidewalk Cafe extension and sending it out sometime later this month. More information on that will be coming soon. But again, all existing Sidewalk Cafes remain active until this May 1st. Also, all of the Sidewalk Cafe reforms that came into effect last year, including the reduction in fee, they will remain in effect for next year. We're also working to extend the expanded outdoor dining program, and we'll have more information to share on that soon. Finally, want to point everybody to the Paycheck Protection Program. If you haven't already, they're open for a second round of applications. There will be open until March 31st. We've done multiple webinars on this. Please check out our YouTube page, youtube.com/ChicagoBACP. Additionally, obviously the federal government is working to pass some additional relief programs. If there's anything in there once it passes that is supporting our businesses, we'll make sure to communicate those directly to you guys. Great, I'm gonna go through and answer a couple questions. Again, I've seen a couple questions come in on the specifics on the impermeable barriers. Some of these I will say, first of all, I'm not an expert on some of these different names of things that are coming through. And I do want to check with our health department. I don't want to give any information on this webinar that is incorrect. So please send us an email. Something like plexiglass barriers is really what we would recommend. But please do send us an email to bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. I don't want to give any information that is incorrect here. Great. Got a question here. Can you please briefly discuss pool tables, darts, pinball tables, things like that? Those all are allowed to be open. Those are really indoor recreation, which is allowed to operate at 50% capacity or 50 people. Note, however, again, no eating or drinking while standing up and playing these, doing these activities. You must be seated at tables or at bar while eating or drinking. So you cannot be eating or drinking while playing darts, pool, things like that, because you need to have your face covering on whenever you're doing that, and you need to take your face covering off if you wanted to eat. So if you don't think you can control the dart board to stop people from eating or drinking while doing it, then you can't have darts open. If we show up, we see people playing pool, walking around, eating or drinking, that's not okay. Pool can be open, but they can't be eating or drinking while doing it. Great. So great question. Plexiglass divider in a room, does it need to go from floor to ceiling? And does there have to be a door between these dividers? So it does not need to go from the floor all the way up to the ceiling if you have a divider. It does need to be taller than, you know, your employees, your patrons, things like that. We recommend something like 7 feet tall if you are dividing a room. Again, happy if you have kind of specific questions on that. I know there's a lot of different potential materials out there. Please send us an email, bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. Great question. For dance clubs, nightclubs, can they operate if music entertainment is provided, but the patrons have table seating? Absolutely. Performance venues, performance, things like that can absolutely be provided with table seating and things like that. So people, again, always need to be seated while eating or drinking, but you can be providing performances while that's happening at that same 50% capacity, no more than 50 people. Question here, what are the rules for event spaces, capacity, closing times, outdoor and indoor areas at one location? So event spaces, really at this point, there isn't too much of a difference in the regulations between event spaces and for bars, restaurants, indoor dining. So event spaces can operate at 50% capacity with no more than 50 people. People must be seated while eating or drinking. They must close by 1 a.m. And that's 50% or 50 people per room or space. So if you have an outdoor space that's entirely separate from an indoor space, first of all, you can have 50 people in the indoor space, and then also separately 50 people in the outdoor space. Again, provided that they're not intermingling, provided that they're not, that they're never more than 50% or 50 people within any one space. Question about sidewalk cafes extension. Sidewalk cafes are extended until May 1st, and we'll absolutely be, we'll be sharing more information on that soon. Got a question here about the 2020 employee tax credit and 2021 SVOG grant. I will admit I'm not an expert on that, but if you send us an email to BACP Outreach, I'll track down the folks that are, and we'll help you get an answer to that question. So got a couple questions about how are we going to enforce this. This is something I'll say, you know, we've been enforcing the COVID-19 regulations throughout COVID. And for the most part, businesses are doing a good job. You know, we're out there, we've cited, we've conducted, I believe, over 9,000 investigations over the past year, starting mid-March of last year. And we've cited about a little over 450 businesses. We've also shut down businesses, broken up parties. This is something that we absolutely are out there enforcing. One thing I will say is if you know of places that are breaking the rules, you know, we're mostly complaint-based. We're going out there proactively, but we are mostly complaint-based. So please submit complaints to 311. We do enforce this. We are enforcing this seriously. We're happy to share more information about that. One thing I will want to make very, very clear as we lead up to St. Patrick's Day, we're very excited that indoor dining is back at 50% capacity, but we all know that St. Patrick's Day is a time that can lead to, you know, large crowds, potentially unruly behavior, and potentially violations of COVID-19 regulations. So So we will be out there strictly enforcing the COVID-19 regulations, partnering with police over St. Patrick's Day. We do not want to see, violations over St. Patrick's Day. And again, this is something we're very actively out there enforcing. All right, let me take a look at a couple additional questions that are coming through. A couple questions about seating for banquets. Again, those same rules for banquets and events, the same rules as for restaurants and bars. That means no more than 6 people per table and 6 feet between tables. So the people that are sitting at a table do not need to have 6 feet between them, but you can have no more than 6 people sitting at a table. So if you typically have 10 people sitting at your tables, now you can have 6. No more than 6 people per table. Great. A couple questions come in. I'm not 100% sure what this question means about dance groups. So if you can please send that question via email with a little bit more detail. I had a question here. Can people dance by their tables with masks on? Can people dance by their tables with masks on? Yes, again, provided that they are 6 feet. The important thing is that 6 feet of social distancing is maintained. Great. I'm going to stay on for a couple minutes. If anybody has any other questions, again, please feel free. Please feel free to send us an email, bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org, and happy to answer them. And we will, again, happy to answer those questions. Please send us an email if you want any clarity on what was discussed today. Thank you.